Welcome to The Conflict, a YouTube channel dedicated to explaining the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My name is Dr. Arnon Degani. I'm a historian. Today, we're going to look at the historical circumstances that created the Zionist movement, and we'll try to find a definition of Zionism that encompasses the people who for almost a century and a half self-defined as Zionists. So, where should we start? Many Zionists would like to begin with the Bible, where a lot of the stories revolve around God's promise to the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Judeans, and then to the Jews to inherit the land of Israel. Some of the Bible is corroborated by archaeology, and there were ancient kingdoms that adhered to a god named Jehovah and worshiped them in a temple in Jerusalem. Then, during the reign of the Roman Empire, in the first centuries of the first millennium, Jews migrated and were exiled to areas throughout the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and Eurasia. What kept these communities distinct from their non-Jewish surrounding was religious faith and customs which contained hope of a return to the Holy Land and a rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. While Judaism is not big on accepting converts, it's pretty obvious that in one way or another, Jews who came in all shapes and colors absorbed non-Jews into their ranks. And that's not a big deal, because at the time, being Jewish, being a member of the Jewish people, was not about genetics. It was about practicing the Jewish faith and observing its commandments. The notion of being a secular Jew or being a secular anything did not arrive until much later in human history. As the centuries progressed, there were major changes that happened in the world. The discovery of the New World, the splitting of Christendom into several factions, and the beginning of capitalist global trade. All of these led to the birth of the European Enlightenment. That was a philosophical shift which restructured the relationship between God, mankind, and nature. The Enlightenment put forward ideals of government for the people and by the people, a notion that heads of state need to be accountable to their citizenry, not to God. Enlightenment ideals fueled the American and French revolutions and created the first instances of modern nationalism. The idea that there should be a correspondence between the people, the state they live under, and the territory they live in. God, in a way, was put on the side, and in his place entered the nation. At about the same time as the European Enlightenment, there was a Jewish Enlightenment in several centers throughout the Jewish diaspora. And this will be the first ingredient of the Zionist primordial soup. Jewish people, too, began to rethink their relationship with religion, the surrounding society, the state, and culture. So this meant that as the Europeans were starting to divide themselves into distinct nations that demanded to govern themselves, Jews were also open to redefining their own collective identity with less emphasis on faith and observance. But as we all know from sports, school rivalries, and rapper beefs, part of forming our group is also hating on the other group. And so, the creation of modern nationalism, the second ingredient of the Zionist primordial soup, also leads to the question of whether Jews, wherever they were to be found, Russia, Germany, France, Italy, Greece, and so on, were they part of those nations? While some thought that, yeah, sure, Jews are a part of our nation, but they just have a different religion, there were also those who saw the Jews as alien to the national body. So now, Jews were being persecuted as members of an alien nation, an accusation that took the form of anti-Semitism, another ingredient, a very important one. There were other elements that inspired or contributed indirectly to Zionism, such as the proliferation of a return of the Jews to the Holy Land narrative among Protestants, and the various projects of settlement in faraway lands. But anti-Semitism is what made European Jews search for a solution outside of Europe. In Central and Western Europe, countries that emancipated Jews during the 19th century, anti-Semitism took the form of daily discrimination and ill treatment. In countries such as France, Germany, and Austria, being against the integration of Jews into public life, that was a legitimate political position. In the Russian Empire, where Jews were denied access to public life, anti-Semitism took on a more violent form known as pogroms, riots that happened in the Russian Empire in what is today Ukraine and Romania. Pogroms were riots perpetrated by local peasants that would sweep through the Jewish communities, rape, loot, and kill, while authorities didn't intervene or even encourage them. It was these pogroms that caused a massive exodus of Jews out of the Russian Empire to other parts of Europe, the United States, and to the area we call Israel-Palestine. In 1881, Russian anarchists assassinated the Russian Tsar Alexander II. Government and anti-Semitic press pinned the blame on the Jews, resulting in a series of pogroms against them, which sparked the first wave of settlement in the land of Israel, Palestine. These first settlers were organized in the Russian Empire in separate associations and were known as the Lovers of Zion. Some of these settlements, known as moshavot, translated as colonies, were sponsored by the French Jewish philanthropist Baron Edmund de Rothschild. Others were funded by the Jewish Colonization Association, backed by Baron Hirsch. These backers bought the land that Jews were to settle on. Other moshavot were self-funded and tried to remain financially independent. The first wave of modern Jewish settlement came at the heels of centuries of Jewish immigration to the land of Israel. But those previous immigrants concentrated in traditional Jewish communities that were woven into the Ottoman society. These new Jewish settlers were often less pious and saw their project as a national revival. This was a new way to be Jewish, not just life in a community identified by religious faith and practices, but being Jewish as a member of a nation that seeks, like all other nations, to be rooted in a place, a piece of land. A nation with a place somewhere on the globe where they can say, we belong here. This is our homeland. For these early lovers of Zion, this national awakening project included embracing an agriculturalist lifestyle. So there you have it. From 1882 to 1903, a wave of settlers came from Eastern Europe, fleeing anti-Semitic persecution and harboring in their hearts a national ideal that they were returning to their ancestral land. But in reality, these people probably didn't see themselves as Zionists, because that term wasn't really in wide use. The emergence of Zionism out of local initiatives to settle in the land of Israel and into a political movement that changed world history, that's on Theodor Herzl. Herzl was born in Budapest, Hungary, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. Herzl was a news reporter who, in the early 1890s, became concerned with anti-Semitism in Europe and the future of Jewish life. According to Herzl, what pushed him into Zionist action was covering from France the Dreyfus Affair. A scandal in which a Jewish officer in the French military was framed as a spy. Those who thought he was guilty often referred to his being Jewish as the key to understanding his treacherous behavior. The affair became the center of French political life and gave anti-Semitism a huge platform in French politics. Herzl claimed that the Jews needed something drastic to improve their lot. In the late 1890s, Herzl wrote and advocated for creating a Jewish state in Palestine. But he also organized to achieve this goal. He tried getting some sort of charter from the Ottoman Sultan that would designate the land of Israel as a place for Jewish settlement. That didn't work out, but Herzl's greatest contribution to Zionism was organizing, in August of 1897, the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. The Congress became the representative body for Jews from all over the world who believed that the solution to anti-Semitism was banding together and creating a national home in the land of Israel. The Congress created the Zionist organization, which would be the executive arm of this operation. Zionism was no longer an idea. It became a movement that could make things happen on the ground. At the closing of the first Congress, Herzl famously announced, "In Basel, I founded the Jewish state." 50 years later, that state was officially proclaimed. So now we know how Zionism was created. But what? Well, looking back, it would seem that it is a movement to create a Jewish state in the land of Israel. But that's not entirely accurate. You see, the world that Zionism was born into was not the world of nation states. Actually, at the time, it was common for people to live in empires which included several nations under the roof of a sovereign. Even the United States, a republic, was divided into states. Herzl's Hungary, for instance, was a state within the Habsburg Empire. And so, the early Zionists didn't, and really couldn't, imagine the Jewish state to be what it turned out to be in 1948, a time when the world's empires were on their way out. You see, Herzl's vision of Zionism was not the disappearance of all European Jewry and its reemergence in the land of Israel. Historians have shown that what Herzl and that first Zionist Congress aimed for was to have a Jewish national home. And once they have that, once Jews can say that they have a place on earth that they can call their own, where they're not outsiders, where they've proven that they can take on all professions denied of them in Europe, then they will be accepted as equals in other countries. Zionism was not out to liquidate the Jewish diaspora. It was there to help it thrive. Why is it important to know this if, in the end, Zionism became centered around the creation and protection of Israel, a Jewish nation state? The reason this is important is that in order to understand this conflict in the best way, we need to avoid conceptualizing each of the sides as fixed in their objectives and even identity. In one of Herzl's vision of Zionism, the Jewish national home was very much supposed to be part of the Ottoman Empire, a diverse Muslim state, and thus it would have been inclusive of the local population already in the land. Things didn't turn out that way, but that doesn't equal the idea that what ended up happening in later years was preconceived and intended. If you want to support our content, subscribe to the channel. And next episode, we'll talk about the creation of the Palestinian National Movement.